3.5 millennia ago on a mountain in the Sinai Desert, an event occurred that changed the entire course of human history. A man stood before a burning bush. A voice was heard, and the world was never the same again. But here is what almost no one tells you. The religion born in that moment has been dying and being reborn, going into exile and returning, shattering and putting itself back together for 35 centuries, and it is still here. This is the complete story of Judaism. Scale of the story. Before we begin, we need to understand something that most people who think they know. This story, Miss Judaism, is not just one thing. It is not a single book, a single belief, a single community, or a single moment of revelation. It is a living dialogue, the longest sustained intellectual and spiritual dialogue in human history between a people, their God, their sacred texts, and an ever-changing world. This dialogue began around 1800 BC with Abraham in the city of Ur. It continues today in Jerusalem, New York, Mumbai, Buenos Aires, in every corner of the world where Jewish communities exist, and every generation has added something vital to it. In this journey, we have used advanced artificial intelligence techniques to reconstruct the ancient world of the Hebrew Bible, the libraries of Talmudic academies, the fire of medieval synagogues, and the faces of thinkers who have debated, criticized, questioned, and renewed this extraordinary tradition over 35 centuries. You will not just hear this history. You will witness it. Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The foundation of everything is the Torah. In Hebrew, the word Torah simultaneously means teaching, doctrine, guidance, law, and religion. It is the name given to the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And according to classical Jewish understanding, it is the direct word of God given to Moses on Mount Sinai. But we must understand what these 5 books actually contain. Genesis begins before everything, before the world, before humanity, before time. It begins with 2 creation stories: the cosmic poetry of 6 days and the intimate garden story of Adam and Eve. From there, Genesis moves to the first murder, the great flood, the Tower of Babel, and then to the story that will determine everything, the story of Abraham, called from the Chaldean city of Ur. Abraham is commanded to leave his homeland for a land he has never seen, and promised that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars. And then, in the most terrifying moment of the entire text, he is commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac, the very person through whom his lineage is to continue. Abraham raises the knife, and in that moment everything the reader has been told about this God is either confirmed or destroyed. Exodus is the story of liberation. The Israelites, descendants of Abraham's grandson Jacob, are enslaved in Egypt. Moses is born, raised in Pharaoh's court, flees to the desert, encounters the burning bush, and is commissioned to return to Egypt to demand the release of his people. 10 plagues descend upon Egypt. The Israelites are set free. They cross the Red Sea. They arrive at Mount Sinai, where, with a terrifying display of thunder, lightning, and thick cloud, the God of Israel speaks. The 10 commandments are given. The covenant is sealed, and the entire relationship between God and Israel is formalized in an astonishingly detailed legal document covering everything, from how slaves are to be treated to the dimensions of the temple. Leviticus is the priest's manual. It consists of 27 chapters containing sacrificial laws, rules of ritual purity, the festival calendar, and holiness codes that separate Israel from surrounding nations. Numbers recounts the 40-year desert journey, the census of the tribes, rebellions and punishments, military campaigns, and the slow approach to the promised land. And Deuteronomy, second law in Greek, is Moses' farewell address. his great sermon to the people he led for 40 years. Reviewing the law one last time before his death on the threshold of the land, he can never enter the oral Torah, the second foing the tion but. The written Torah is only half the story. Classical Judaism insists on something that surprises most outsiders. There are two Torahs, the written Torah, the 5 books, and the oral Torah, the interpretive tradition, which, according to rabbinic teaching, was given to Moses at Sinai at the same time and passed down orally from teacher to student through the generations. The great Talmudic scholar Hillel explained this in the 1st century BC to a skeptic who came to him wanting to convert to Judaism on the condition of accepting only the written Torah and not the oral Torah. Hillel accepted this condition and then step by step showed that without the oral Torah, not even the alphabet of the written Torah could be understood. This month shall be the beginning of months for you. Which calendar does this refer to? The written Torah does not say. The oral Torah explains it exactly. How should tefillin be bound to the arm? The text commands it, but gives no instructions. The oral Torah provides them, without the interpretive tradition. The written Torah is a sealed book. This oral tradition, despite the principle that it must remain oral, was put into writing in a work called the Mishnah around the year 200 by Rabbi Judah, the Prince. The Mishnah is a systematic body of laws covering every aspect of Jewish law, agriculture, a tractate on the Sabbath, festivals, family law, civil law, temple rituals, and ritual purity. It is arranged not chronologically, but thematically into 6 orders containing 63 tractates, and immediately after its compilation, the next generation of scholars began to debate it. These debates, conducted in the academies of both the land of Israel and Babylon, formed the Talmud, in fact 2 Talmuds. The Jerusalem Talmud compiled around 400 and the Babylonian Talmud compiled around 600. The Babylonian Talmud is the greatest monument of classical Judaism, a vast, comprehensive, and constantly digressing masterpiece of legal reasoning, storytelling, medicine, astronomy, folklore, dream interpretation, ethical teachings, and theological speculation. It amounts to 27 million words across 37 tractates. It is not a book to be read, but a universe to live in even today. Orthodox Jews study 1 page of the Talmud every day in a 7.5-hour cycle called Daf Yomi. The created world of classical Judaism, the Babylonian exile. To understand how Judaism became what it is today, we must understand the catastrophe that transformed it. In 586 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II destroyed the Temple of Solomon, the center of Israelite religion, and exiled the entire population of Jerusalem to Babylon. This was not just a political or military defeat. It was a theological crisis of the first order. If the God of Israel is the God of the universe, how could he allow his own house to be destroyed and his people dragged into captivity? Was he defeated by the Babylonian gods? Was Israel's sin so great that God had abandoned them completely? The answers to these questions formulated in Babylon over the following decades transferred the Israelite religion into Judaism in exile, far from the temple. The Israelites could no longer perform the sacrificial worship that lay at the center of their religious life, so they invented something new: the synagogue, not a place of sacrifice, but a place of reading and prayer, a place where the community could gather, the Torah could be read aloud, and God could be encountered through words instead of rituals. This invention, synagogue, was one of the most important religious institutions in human history. It became the model for both the Christian church and the Islamic mosque. In Babylon, scribes gathered, compiled, edited, and brought the ancient texts of Israel close to the canonical form we know today. The great figures of the exile, the prophet Ezekiel, with his vision of the chariot throne. The anonymous prophet, known as Second Isaiah, who declared that God controls all history and all nations, deepened and universalized Israel's theology in ways that would shape the next 3,000 years. When the Persian king Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BC, he allowed the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland. Some returned, many stayed. And those who stayed, the Babylonian Jewish diaspora would eventually produce the greatest monument of classical Jewish thought. The Babylonian Talmud in Israel, however, there was the complete formation of the Hebrew Bible, the explosion of apocalyptic literature, the emergence of the Pharisee movement that would evolve into rabbinic Judaism, and the rise and fall of the Hasmonean kingdom. This was also the world into which Jesus of Nazareth was born, a world full of intense Jewish religious dynamism, competing sects and movements, expectations of the end of the age, and the crushing weight of the Roman Empire. The Second Temple period was characterized by several fundamental transformations. The idea of a personal God intervening in history became more complex and philosophically sophisticated. The concept of angels and demons, partly borrowed from encounters with Persian Zoroastrianism, became increasingly elaborate. The idea of resurrection, almost completely absent in earlier texts, became a central doctrine for the Pharisees and was debated by the Sadducees. The term Messiah, which originally meant merely anointed one and referred to kings and priests, became an eschatological figure of expectation, a future king who would restore David's kingdom and usher in the age of God's universal reign. The return from exile also established something that would define Judaism forever: the centrality of the text. During the time of Ezra the scribe, who brought a copy of the Torah from Babylon and read it publicly to the entire congregation gathered in Jerusalem, the authority of the written word was officially established. From that moment on, Judaism became a religion of the book, where the study of the sacred text is an act of worship in itself. The Torah scroll became the most sacred object in Jewish life, handwritten by a specially trained scribe, Sofer, according to hundreds of detailed rules. This scroll is clothed in fine fabric, crowned, kept in the holiest place in the synagogue, and treated with every aspect of respect that would be shown to a living king. Identity.This, Judaism, the encounter with G or EC. Alexander the Great swept through the ancient Near East in the 330s BC. He brought with him not only armies, but an entire civilization. The Greek language, Greek philosophy, Greek aesthetics, and Greek ideas about reason, nature, and the divine. Jewish communities across the Mediterranean world faced an urgent and crucial question: how does the revelation given at Sinai relate to the wisdom developed in Athens? Are these two traditions irreconcilably opposed, or can they be synthesized? Hellenistic Judaism was the movement that attempted this synthesis. Its greatest work is the Septuagint, the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, produced in Alexandria around 270 BC. According to tradition, 72 scholars translated it independently and achieved the exact same result, a miracle testifying to divine approval. What is certain is that it made the Hebrew Bible accessible to millions of Greek-speaking Jews in the diaspora who had forgotten the language of their ancestors, and it brought Jewish thought to the Greek-speaking world at large. The great names of Hellenistic Jewish philosophy took this encounter even further. Aristobulus, the first known Jewish philosopher, argued that Plato and Aristotle had learned from Moses, that Greek philosophy ultimately derived from the Torah. The letter of Aristides asserted that the God of the Jews and the god the Greeks called Zeus were the same, being known by different names. Ben Sirach synthesized the Jewish wisdom tradition with Stoic and Platonic philosophy, and the Book of Wisdom personified divine wisdom as a cosmic mediator between God and creation, a concept that would later deeply influence both Jewish mysticism and early Christian theology. The greatest of the Hellenistic Jewish thinkers was Philo of Alexandria, who lived between approximately 25 BC and 50 AD, and produced philosophical theological works of extraordinary scope and depth. Philo read the Torah as an allegory of philosophical truths. He argued that the literal story of Abraham's journey was also a philosophical account of the soul's journey toward wisdom. The burning bush is the Logos, the divine reason that illuminates without consuming. The exodus from Egypt is the mind's liberation from the tyranny of passions. Philo's Logos theology, concept of a divine mediating principle between the transcendent God and the material world, became one of the most influential ideas in Western religious thought, shaping not only Jewish philosophy, but also the Christian doctrine of incarnation and the Islamic philosophical tradition. Destruction of the temple and the birth of rabbinic Judaism. In 70 AD, the Roman general Titus destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The sacrificial system, the elaborate priestly ritual that had been at the center of Jewish worship for 1,000 years, permanently came to an end. The Jewish community faced its second great existential crisis, in some ways even more devastating than the Babylonian exile. This time, there was no expectation of an imminent return. The exile would last 2,000 years. What saved Judaism was the work of a single man and a small circle of scholars. Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai, smuggled out of besieged Jerusalem in a coffin, went to the Roman general and asked for just one thing: "Let me establish a school in the town of Yavna." This request was granted, and Yavna ben Zakkai and his colleagues began the task of rebuilding Judaism. Without the temple, prayer replaced sacrifice. The synagogue replaced the temple. The rabbi replaced the priest, and Torah study replaced ritual performance. Ben Zakkai taught, now that the temple is destroyed, acts of love and kindness can provide atonement, just as the temple once did. The catastrophe of 70 AD paradoxically became the moment when Judaism became the religion it is today. A religion of text, community, prayer, and ethical practice that can survive without land, temple, or political structure. Over the next 5 centuries, the rabbinic academies in both the land of Israel and Babylon produced the massive body of law and literature that would define Jewish life for the next 2,000 years. The Mishnah, the 2 Talmuds, the Midrash compilations, highly imaginative, expansive, often entertaining interpretations of the biblical narrative, the prayer book, the codes of law. All of this was built upon the ruins of the temple by scholars who insisted that the Torah is inexhaustible, that every generation's reading adds something new without altering what came before. The medieval world philosophy, mysticism, and Pei-Arisicution. Middle Ages presented the 2 greatest challenges to classical rabbinic Judaism and Judaism's most extraordinary response to these challenges. The first challenge was philosophical. In the 9th and 10th centuries, the Mutazilites, a movement within Islam, applied the tools of Greek philosophy to Islamic theology, questioning whether reason and revelation are compatible, whether God's attributes are literal or metaphorical, and whether free will and divine determinism can coexist. Jewish thinkers could not ignore these questions. In the early 10th century, Saadia Gaon, the brilliant head of the Sura Academy in Babylon, became the first great Jewish philosopher in the Arabic tradition. In the Book of Beliefs and Opinions, he systematically argued that reason and revelation, when properly understood, teach the same truths. Since both come from the same God, they cannot contradict each other. But the greatest of the medieval Jewish philosophers was Moses Maimonides, Rambam. Born in Cordoba, Spain in 1138, who later lived in Egypt in 32. Years of intellectual labor that makes one feel the inadequacy of one's own life. Maimonides produced two masterpieces. The first is the Mishneh Torah, a complete and systematic code of all Jewish law in 14 volumes, written in clear and beautiful Hebrew. A work that eliminates the need to search through the labyrinthine debates of the Talmud. The second is the Guide for the Perplexed, addressed to the Jewish student trained in Aristotelian philosophy and caught between the demands of reason and the requirements of faith. Maimonides' answer was revolutionary. The God of the Torah is not a supernatural being who gets angry and repents, who has arms and a face. All such statements are metaphorical. The true God of philosophy and the true God of the Torah are the same being. Infinite, perfect, unchanging, knowing, and the purpose of the commandments is not to satisfy God's needs. God has no needs, but to perfect human beings mentally and morally. Maimonides was attacked from many sides. Mystics felt he reduced God to an abstract concept. Traditionalists argued he violated the plain meaning of the Torah, and later, Jewish thinkers debated his conclusions for centuries, but no one could ignore him. Second great development of the Middle Ages was Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, the counter-movement to Maimonidean rationalism. The great Kabbalistic texts, especially the Zohar, attributed to the 2nd century Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai, but actually written in 13th century Spain, described a hidden structure of divine reality, far more elaborate and dramatic than anything in philosophy. Ein Sof, the infinite, projected itself outward through 10 divine manifestations, the Sephiro, like light passing through a prism. The lower world was a dim reflection of the upper world's human action. The performance of commandments, prayer, meditation participated in a cosmic drama, repairing the fractures in the divine structure caused by the initial creation. Humans were not just moral actors following God's instructions. Humans were beings participating in the life of God. Meanwhile, Jewish communities in Europe and the Islamic world throughout the Middle Ages were subjected to constant persecution, forced conversions, expulsions, and massacres. The Crusades brought devastating violence to Jewish communities in the Rhine Valley. The Spanish Inquisition led to the forced conversion or expulsion of one of history's greatest Jewish communities. The Black Death was blamed on the Jews, leading to mass killings across Europe. And in 1492, the same year Columbus sailed west, the Jews of Spain, the Sephardim, were exiled, scattering across the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually the Americas. Spionozie and the birth of modern Jewish technology. 17th century revealed the first major fracture in classical Judaism's self-understanding. Born in 1632 in Amsterdam to a community of Portuguese Jewish exiles, Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated from the Amsterdam Jewish community in 1656 with the harshest terms ever used against a single individual. The writ of excommunication accused him of espousing abominable heresies and ordered that no member of the community should speak to him, read his writings, or be under the same roof as him. What had Spinoza done? He had applied the same historical and critical analysis required by new scientific methods to the Torah, following hints from the medieval philosopher Abraham ibn Ezra. He argued that Moses could not have written the entire Torah. The Torah contained third-person accounts of events that occurred after Moses' death. Spinoza concluded that the Torah was written by multiple authors at different times and later, compiled and edited by subsequent editors. God had not dictated the Torah to Moses, word for word. The Torah is a human-made document expressing the religious experience and political needs of an ancient people. This was not just an academic opinion. it was a theological revolution. If the Torah was not directly dictated by God, then its authority was historical, not divine. And its laws were not eternal commands, but expressions of a specific culture's understanding of the good. An understanding that could legitimately evolve. As that culture evolved, Spinoza's critique was incorporated into the Jewish Enlightenment, known as the Haskalah. In the following century, the great 18th century, German Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn argued that Judaism is not a religion of dogmatic belief, but a religion of divinely revealed law, and that while Jewish law is binding upon Jews, it does not preclude full participation in secular civil culture. Jews could be both fully Jewish and fully German, French, or Dutch. The ghetto was not the natural habitat of the Jew. It was the product of persecution that must and could end. Reform. Conservative, Orthodox, and Reconstructionist Judaism encounter with modernity spawned the great denominational divides of modern Judaism that continue to define the community today. Reform Judaism emerged in early 19th century Germany, associated with thinkers like Abraham Geiger and Moses Mendelssohn. Its core assertion was that neither the written nor the oral Torah was literally dictated by God, but rather a human record of Israel's evolving encounter with the divine. The laws of the Torah were not eternal commands, but historical expressions of religious understanding. Some retained their value, while others had been superseded by moral progress. Dietary laws, laws of ritual purity, many commandments governing daily life, these could be cast aside if they no longer served the purpose of spiritual elevation. The 1885 Pittsburgh Platform, the foundational manifesto of American Reform Judaism, embraced Darwin's theory of evolution and declared the miraculous narratives of the Torah to be the primitive mythology of an ancient people, not historical fact. What was binding was the Torah's moral teaching, its vision of human dignity and social justice. Conservative Judaism emerged as a reaction against what its founders saw as the extreme radicalism of the Reform movement, associated with figures like Zacharias Frankel and Solomon Schechter. This current sought a middle path, taking modern historical research seriously, acknowledging that the Torah has a historical dimension and that rabbinic law evolves while emphasizing the binding nature of Jewish law and the importance of Jewish tradition and communal continuity. In conservative thought, the Torah is neither the literal word of God nor a purely human document. It is the record of Israel's encounter with God, containing the human and the divine in an inseparable mix. Orthodox Judaism, though partly emerging as a reaction to the Reform movement, sees itself as the unbroken continuation of classical rabbinic Judaism for orthodoxy. The Torah was dictated by God to Moses word for word, and, letter by letter, the oral Torah was given simultaneously. The rabbinic tradition is authoritative. The laws of the Torah, including those that modern sensibilities find difficult, are not historical artifacts, but eternal commands. Modernity is not a challenge to be accommodated, but a context to be navigated while remaining faithful to tradition. And in the 20th century, Reconstructionist Judaism, founded by Mordecai Kaplan, proposed something more radical than all of them. According to Kaplan, Judaism is not primarily a religion, but a civilization. The Jewish people created the idea of God, not vice versa. God is not a supernatural person who commands. God is the power in the universe that makes for humanity's salvation and well-being, a naturalistic, not supernatural concept. The Torah is the record of the Jewish people's evolving understanding of this power. Its authority is not a divine decree, but the authority of the accumulated wisdom of a people. The Holocaust and the State of Israel, the twin catastrophes of the 20th century, brought the two most earth-shattering events in Jewish history since the destruction of the Temple. They Holocaust systematic murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945 wiped out a third of the world's Jewish population and effectively ended the civilization of Ashkenazi Jewry that had existed for a millennium in Eastern Europe. It shattered every theological framework that supported Jewish thought, belief in a God who protects his people, the belief that suffering has a redemptive meaning, the belief in the ultimate progress of human civilization. Theological responses to the Holocaust have divided Jewish thinkers ever since. Eliezer Berkovitz argued that God's silence in the face of evil was the necessary price of human freedom. Emil Fackenheim proposed a new commandment, 614th commandment. Thou shalt not hand Hitler posthumous victories. Jews must survive, remember, and continue to be Jewish as an act of resistance against evil. Elie Wiesel bore witness to the horror in a language that broke all rules of religious discourse, addressing God directly with accusation and grief. And others, most strikingly, Richard Rubinstein, concurred that the God of history, the God who intervenes in human events, could not survive Auschwitz 3 years after the liberation of the Nazi death camps. In 1948, the State of Israel was established for religious Zionists. This was the beginning of divine redemption, the first flowering of the Messianic age. For secular Zionists, it was a practical solution to the problem of Jewish vulnerability in the diaspora state, where Jews would no longer depend on the decisions of other peoples. For ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists, it was human usurpation of what should be God's work. Messianic redemption must come through divine intervention, not political action. Judaism today, the conversations CONTIN use today, are approximately 15 million Jews in the world, about 65 million in Israel, 57 million in the United States, and the rest scattered across the globe. Denominational divides are in some ways sharper, in other ways more permeable. The questions are as vibrant as ever. What is the Torah? Who wrote it? What does it demand? What does it permit? What is the relationship between the Jewish people and God, and between the Jewish people and all other peoples? What does it mean to be Jewish when the traditions of grandparents seem incredibly distant, and when intermarriage blurs boundaries that once seemed so clear? But amidst these uncertainties, one thing remains unchanged every Shabbat. As the sun sets on Friday evening, Jews around the world light candles, recite blessings over wine and bread, and separate the sacred from the ordinary. Every year, the cycle of Torah portions is read from beginning to end, then begins again in every synagogue, as has been the case for 35 centuries. There is a handwritten Torah scroll, clothed in royal garments, treated with reverence for the Word of God, and somewhere in this cycle of reading, debate, questioning, and return, the conversation Abraham started in Ur continues. Perhaps the most astounding intellectual and spiritual enterprise in human history. The covenant has not ended. The conversation is not over. The flame still burns. See you in the past.